Hello, I'm the Lore Master, and welcome to a new segment on my channel, SCPs. What are SCPs, you may ask? SCPs are anomalous entities, objects, or places contained by the SCP Foundation, whose motto it is to secure, contain, and protect. The SCP Foundation is the largest creative writing group on the internet, and this is my entrance into their universe. I hope to make many more SCPs on this channel, so let me know if you like them, and comment and leave comments in the down below. Also like and subscribe. This is the Lore Master with SCP-1269, the Ultimate Orphanage. SCP-1269 is a large facility in Washington County, Ohio, in the town of Limerick. It is considered the ultimate orphanage and is home to hundreds of children that happen to find themselves there. The architecture of the building is unique and has a Gothic and medieval style architecture, with the influence of Western and Central Europe. It resembles a fairy tale castle from the medieval ages. It is beautifully decorated with gargoyles in its stone exterior. It is larger than most buildings in the city. In fact, it is the largest building in that part of Ohio. But what is inside the SCP is far more remarkable than anything on the outside. Inside, just past the doorway of the lobby, one can enter woodlands that would appear to be Northern Europe, forests of strange animals that are a combination of random animals and mystical animals that one would see in a fairy tale. The name of the orphanage is Hans Christian Andersen Memorial Orphanage. Once inside the orphanage, the walls of the building appear to be invisible, and no one can see them. But if you put your hand to them, you can feel and sense them and know that there's a wall there. The rooms are endless and seem to go on forever in any direction, taking one to a vast imagination of wonders. The SCP was first encountered by the Foundation in the 1950s, when large portions of orphans started disappearing out of the county of Washington, as well as surrounding counties, and the far northern portions of Ohio. No one really knew how or where these kids disappeared, but one of the Foundation's agents, Mr. Johann Grimm, put a tracking device on one of the children that ended up disappearing, which led to this SCP. The only adults allowed in SCP-1269 are people who call the SCP home. They are taller than most, with red and green hair and green eyes, and freckles on their cheeks. That are noticeably paler than most people who live in the surrounding area, with a thick Irish accent. Whatever they are asked where they come from, they simply reply west of the Meadows and south of the Vale, and one will get nothing from them other than that. But they do seem interested in talking about children, and will talk for hours on end about what will make them happy, or how children need to find a home that is safer and far better than this world. These people are called SCP-1249. While humanoid in appearance and in speaking terms, they wore long jackets and clothes that cover most of their body, except the face. They seem to be more mysterious and mystical. They are very fond of poems and music of old European folk style. SCP-1269 goes in search of children. Once they have returned with the child, they will take off their jackets, large hats that they carry everywhere with them to reveal that these people are not people but fairies. Once inside the SCP, they have ladybug-like wings spreading out from their back and can fly about in the SCP. One of the investigations of this SCP, we sent a young man by the name of Truman to get in and see what was in the building and what went on there. He spent 24 hours before returning and saying he had felt like he had been gone for 14 days. If a person can leave in 24 hours, he won't become part of the world, but it takes a couple days to get oriented to your present world again. He was able to draw a map of sorts to describe what he had seen, describing it as the another world, a place where mystical beings and fairies have lived that have been able to escape an event known as the end of the age for them. He said countless creatures of northern folklore were able to escape the British Isles and all of Western Europe and came here to live in America. They settled in the building and began to make it into their own fairy world. Some of those findings were that there were 4 tribes that made up the world, each with their own king. The first was Maelstrom of the Midnight, led by a fairy known as Twilight, known as the Violet King, who controls the West Wing. The next was Lucas Nightmoon, the king in Azure, who hails from the Midnight Mountains, and he has described them. The mountains are in the far north of the world where the frost giants once lived, a land of ice and snow. Their wings are said that represent stork wings, and were said to be responsible for bringing children into the world. The king in gold is next, Asur Sarhad from the south, with wings of a falcon. And finally, the king Li Fong from the east, whose wings were like a ladybug, soft and quiet. These 4 races are the fairies who left their homes on Earth and created a new world with the help of a being simply known as the Storyteller. The story created this infinite plane that mirrors our own world, but yet is more majestic and fairy-like. The kings brought an ark of all the mystical creatures from all 4 corners of the globe, which with them as the end of the age began, so that they could rebuild and restart an age of magic and fantasy. The people in the SCP have a strong hatred for science and scientists and will kill any they see or find. So, for the safety of our researchers who go into the world, they must claim to be witches, sorcerers, warlocks, and alchemists, or simply, under the umbrella term, scholars of myth and magic. But this does not explain the need for children to call them, the need for why they need children or call to children from all over the planet. This is because of an event known as the Red Winter, which most of their children were wiped out and lost the ability to reproduce long ago. So they send out their scouts to find more children to stay there. And the more they stay, the more fairy-like they become, and will eventually replace the old generation. The children are called changelings and usually brought from low-income families, used to being poor and living in substandard conditions, so they would feel they have been brought to a fun and interesting place, so they won't try and escape until it's too late. They enter the land and believe the fairy tales are so enthralled by it all, they have no desire to leave. When the children enter the SCP, they are taken to one of the largest cities, called 5, to evaluate and determine what kingdom the child is best suited for. 5 is the capital city of the world and is far larger than any city on Earth. Here, the children are introduced to all the fantasies that a child can think of to see where their interest lies. Everyone in this world has a skill. Alchemists are the scientists of their world and are known how to use chemicals and change things into different forms. Blacksmiths and builders who build weapons and structures. There are animal caretakers, farmers, musicians, and poets. The longer the children stays there, the more they forget about the outside world and become more accustomed to this world. They will eventually lose all thought and knowledge of the outside world and even how to function in it. They will begin to believe they were born in this world and that if they have any images of something in the other world, they will think it was just a bad dream. As they become more fairy-like, they take on more the qualities of a fairy. When children are taken from the other world, they experience confusion and paranoia at first, but this soon leaves them as they get reaccustomed to their new surroundings. While the SCP seems to be a pleasant and fun place, the number of children who have been shown who had been stolen was in the thousands, which is unacceptable and needed to be dealt with by the Foundation. The SCP Foundation declared that the building should be contained at all cost, so children would not continue to be stolen. The SCP Foundation decided to buy the entire county of Washington and move out citizens of Limerick and replace them with SCP staff, personnel, scientists, whose job it would be to watch the SCP and monitor anyone coming and going into the building. The SCP Foundation, masquerading as the National Park Service, declared the city of Limerick and the county as one of the most important historical sites in the nation. But as the people were leaving, they were given level 4 amnestics to make them forget about the place and the entire situation. Next, they hunted down any fairy folk outside the SCP before containment, so they could be contained as well. The number of fairies captured by the Foundation was redacted, so no one would know the happenings in the place. Only approved staff have access to this information. Once all the fairies were captured and placed back into the facility, the iron door was constructed and sealed to keep anyone from entering or exiting the building again. Iron bars was also placed on the windows, and guard towers were constructed to make sure no one would get out of the building. It was made to look like an abandoned building with a danger sign set out. No one would be interested in trying to get in. Fines were placed all around the building, so they would take over the building and make it look the part of the landscape eventually. Containment of the SCP is critical to protect children of the world and not to allow them to be taken and added to the fairy world. The classification for this is safe for now, but if the door ever opens and they escape, it will be upgraded to CADA and will be dealt with immediately. This has been the Lore Master, and subscribe for more SCPs, more original stories, and more fun fiction. This is Lore Master, saying like and subscribe, and goodbye.